Hey everyone, hope you're doing well. If you're using this to fall asleep, get cozy, and relax, don't forget to subscribe, and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Alright, let's get into the story. In September 2015, 21-year-old Molly McLaren embarked on a new chapter of her life, studying physical education at the University of Kent in southeast England. With her vibrant personality, Molly quickly found her place among new friends. Her best friend, Chloe Smith, described her as magnetic, someone who drew people in with her zest for life and genuine warmth. Everyone seemed to gravitate toward her, and she was well-liked by all who knew her. Beyond her studies, Molly poured her passion for fitness and healthy living into an online blog, where she shared tips and inspiration. On the surface, her life appeared idyllic, but beneath this polished exterior, Molly faced a private struggle. For years, she had battled bulimia, an eating disorder that weighed heavily on her. Determined to overcome it, she channeled her energy into her studies and her blog, hoping to inspire others while working toward her own recovery. In the summer of 2016, Molly's life took a new turn when she matched with 25-year-old Joshua Stimson on Tinder. Joshua, a window salesman, seemed charming, resourceful, and kind, at least at first. His colleagues, however, saw a different side of him. They described him as having two personas, one a charismatic, intelligent salesman, and the other a withdrawn, depressed loner. Molly, however, only saw the charming Joshua. Handsome and well-built, his charisma and confidence captivated the 21-year-old. For 3 months, Molly and Joshua exchanged messages, building a connection before meeting in person. When they finally did, everything seemed to click. They began dating regularly, and Molly, smitten, told Chloe that Joshua was her first real boyfriend. Early in their relationship, Joshua confided in Molly that he had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. This revelation concerned Molly's mother, Joanne, who worried that Joshua's mental health struggles, combined with Molly's own challenges with bulimia, might overwhelm her daughter. But Molly was optimistic, believing that their mutual support would strengthen their bond and help them both grow. To those around them, Molly and Joshua appeared to be a happy couple. Even Joanne, initially wary, began to warm to Joshua. He spent much of his free time at Molly's family home, bonding with her father, Doug, over football and shared interests. Their connection grew so strong that Joshua chose to spend Father's Day with Doug instead of his own father. In April 2017, Molly's family rallied to support Joshua as he ran the London Marathon to raise funds for bipolar disorder awareness, a cause close to his heart, or so it seemed. But as months passed, cracks began to appear in Molly and Joshua's relationship. By March, Joanne noticed that her daughter seemed bored and burdened by Joshua's constant need for her attention. Doug observed that Joshua had no friends of his own and relied heavily on Molly and her family for companionship. His behavior grew increasingly possessive. He wanted Molly all to himself, showing little interest in making new friends or maintaining old ones. He began showing up at Molly's house uninvited, and when she was studying, he would lie on her bed, waiting, as if needing to know her every move. The situation escalated when Joshua quit his job to spend more time with Molly during her summer break from college. This decision placed immense strain on their already fragile relationship. Up until this point, his behavior had been frustrating, but not alarming. That changed during a family gathering at a large party hosted by Molly's aunt. Joshua, invited as Molly's partner, acted strangely, staring at her incessantly and trying to control her movements, insisting she sit beside him and not dance with anyone, not even her cousins. One cousin, meeting Joshua for the first time, later said he left a poor impression. After the party, Molly and Joshua returned to their shared bedroom, where a heated argument erupted. Without her consent, Joshua began recording Molly, upsetting her deeply. Distraught, Molly texted her mother, begging her to come to the room. When Joanne arrived, she found Molly in tears and Joshua attempting to show her the recordings, claiming they revealed Molly's true character. This incident was a turning point for Molly. She knew she had to end the relationship, but she feared Joshua's reaction, given his erratic behavior and bipolar disorder. Still, she refused to let fear trap her in a relationship with someone she no longer loved, someone whose aggression and manipulation were becoming undeniable. Molly chose to break up with Joshua in the safety of her friend's company. Pulling him aside, she told him it was over. As she had feared, Joshua reacted with fury, shouting and causing a scene in front of everyone. But Molly felt safer with her friends around, knowing Joshua's unpredictability made a private breakup too risky. Unsurprisingly, Joshua refused to accept the breakup. He bombarded Molly with messages, but she stood firm, resolute in her decision to move on. Joshua's behavior only worsened. He began stalking Molly on social media, posting slanderous lies, including claims that she was a drug addict who used cocaine. At first, Molly tried to ignore him, hoping he would eventually stop. But after consulting her friends, she decided to take action. Joshua's rage seemed to intensify with each passing day. So on June 22, 2017, Molly gathered printouts of his harassing posts and went to the police station. Because Joshua had no criminal record, the police advised her to block him on social media and report any further abuse. An officer called Joshua to warn him, but he was dismissive, showing no concern for the police's intervention. Days later, Molly posted on Snapchat about going to dinner with friends, confident that Joshua, now blocked, wouldn't see it. Yet, to her shock, he appeared at the same restaurant. She tried to dismiss it as a coincidence, but his presence unnerved her, and she left early. On June 28, 2017, Molly went to Pure Gym in a shopping center, filming her workout to share with potential recruiters as she pursued a career as a personal trainer. Later, she joined friends at a pub. Joshua walked in, accompanied by an unfamiliar woman. Chloe noticed Molly's terror at his sudden appearance. Another coincidence in such a short time felt impossible. It became clear that Joshua, despite being blocked, was tracking Molly's social media posts and deliberately showing up where she was. He stood off to the side, staring at Molly and her friends, making her so uncomfortable that she left the pub early. By now, it was evident that Joshua was stalking Molly. The next day, June 29, 2017, she returned to the gym at 10 a.m. Shortly after, at 10:45, Joshua arrived. Molly texted her mother a photo, writing that Joshua was there, lingering near her. Gym surveillance footage confirmed he had sought her out and positioned himself beside her. Feeling increasingly unsafe, Molly called Joanne, who urged her to go home but to stay calm and drive safely. At 11:02, Molly messaged her group chat, expressing how she constantly felt the need to watch her back. 6 minutes later, at 11:08, Molly got into her car in the shopping center parking lot. Joshua appeared behind her, yanked open the driver's side door, and attacked. The assault, witnessed by bystanders, was brutal. Benjamin Morton, one of the onlookers, sprang into action when he realized what was happening. He saw Joshua stabbing Molly in the head and neck. Morton shouted for others to call 911, then tried to intervene while keeping a safe distance. When shouting didn't stop Joshua, Morton slammed his leg in the car door and attempted to pull him away, but his hand slipped in the blood. Realizing Molly was beyond saving, Morton focused on preventing Joshua's escape, parking his car to block Molly's vehicle. Joshua, however, had no intention of fleeing. At some point, he stopped the attack, stood beside the car, and stared blankly ahead, his expression devoid of emotion. When police arrived, witnesses saw him wipe blood from his face before surrendering. Molly was pronounced dead at 11:43 a.m. Her loved ones were shattered. Joanne had to break the news to Doug, who was working on a boat in Senegal, over the phone. Joshua, taken for questioning, claimed he had no memory of the attack and pleaded guilty to manslaughter, not murder, likely hoping for a lighter sentence. Despite committing the crime in broad daylight, covered in blood, with a murder weapon in his possession and numerous witnesses, he denied intent. Molly's family was left grappling with unimaginable grief as they faced the court process, where gruesome details of her death emerged. The autopsy revealed that Joshua had stabbed Molly 75 times with a paring knife he purchased from a home-based store. During the trial, it was revealed that Joshua did not have bipolar disorder, as he had claimed. Psychiatrists, including Dr. Philip Joseph, described him as vain and obsessed with his own feelings, while Dr. Shaib Majid diagnosed him with borderline personality disorder, which impaired his self-control. Joshua offered no explanation for his actions. His defense argued that the murder occurred under diminished responsibility, claiming his sensitivity to rejection stemmed from his mother's abandonment when he was a child and his parents' divorce when he was 12. The court also heard from two of Joshua's ex-girlfriends, Alexander Dale and Leah Hubbard, who described his controlling and possessive behavior. Alexander recounted how he called her dozens of times a day, threatened to drown her while she was on vacation, and slashed her car tires. Leah described similar harassment, including an incident where Joshua waited outside a bar for 5 hours after being removed by a bouncer for harassing her. The investigation uncovered a critical failure by Kent police. Years earlier, Alexandra had reported Joshua's harassment, but was not logged, and he received only a text warning from an officer. Because he had no recorded criminal history, police underestimated the danger he posed to Molly, treating her report as a minor issue. Joshua later admitted he had been thinking about harming Molly for days, believing she should have ended their relationship with more respect. On February 6, 2018, Joshua was found guilty of murder and sentenced to a minimum of 26 years in prison. The jury reached a unanimous verdict in hours. Judge Adele Williams described the act as premeditated, deliberate, and cruel, driven by revenge. She called Joshua a very dangerous young man who would pose a threat to women for years, not for life. He showed no emotion as the verdict was read. Joshua is currently incarcerated and will be eligible for parole on January 28, 2044. Molly's parents continue to grapple with their loss and frustration with a legal system that failed their daughter. They advocate for changes to stalking and harassment reporting laws to protect others from suffering Molly's fate. In 2018, Benjamin Morton, who risked his life to intervene, was honored for his bravery by the High Sheriff of Kent, George Jessel, with a commendation and a £500 award at Maidstone Crown Court. This heartbreaking story serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked harassment and the importance of taking such reports seriously. Molly's parents hope their daughter's legacy will inspire reforms to prevent future tragedies. In 2006, the murder of 29-year-old Nisha Patel Nasri in London captivated the nation. What initially appeared to be a straightforward case unraveled into a complex web of lies and betrayal. It took meticulous police work, diving into small details and re-examining evidence, to uncover the truth and bring those responsible to justice. This is the gripping story of Nisha's life, her tragic death, and the investigation that followed. Nisha Patel Nasri was born in 1977 in Luton, a town in Bedfordshire, southeast England. Her parents had immigrated from Gujarat, India, and Nisha grew up in Wembley, a vibrant northwest London neighborhood famous for its iconic stadium. Her life was marked by early losses. Her father passed away in 1996, and her mother followed in 2001. Deeply family-oriented, Nisha devoted much of her time to caring for her mother during her illness, a testament to her compassionate nature. Ambitious and hardworking, Nisha left school at 18 to open her own hair salon. She poured herself into the business, working 7 days a week. Her dedication paid off. Within a decade, her salon thrived, serving over 2,000 clients and generating substantial income. At 26, Nisha met Fadi Nasri, a man 4 years her senior. After just 6 months of dating, they married. Friends described them as a loving, well-matched couple, seemingly perfect together. Beyond her business, Nisha was passionate about giving back to her community. A few months after meeting Fadi, she became a volunteer police officer or special constable in Wembley, where she had lived her entire life. She took pride in helping make her neighborhood safer, performing her duties without pay because she believed in the cause. Money was never her motivation. Her older brother, Caton, who lived nearby, shared a close bond with her. He recalled Nisha's love for children. She adored her nieces and nephews, spoiling them with gifts, trips, and extravagant birthday parties. Cheerful, outgoing, and fearless, Nisha was known for her active lifestyle, particularly her love of swimming. She wasn't afraid to speak her mind and faced confrontation head-on. Together with Fadi, Nisha co-managed a limousine rental business. Fadi handled administrative tasks, while Nisha oversaw the finances. Both her salon and the limousine business flourished, and their personal life appeared equally harmonious. With a wide circle of friends and a reputation for being well-liked, the couple seemed to have everything they needed for a bright future. On the evening of May 11, 2006, Fadi and Caton stopped by Nisha's salon before closing for haircuts. Later, Fadi cooked dinner for Nisha, a quiet celebration following their third wedding anniversary the previous day. After dinner, Fadi left to play pool with a friend, while Nisha, feeling tired, showered, changed into pajamas, and prepared for bed. Around 11:30 p.m., a piercing scream shattered the quiet of their peaceful street. Alarmed neighbors rushed outside and found Nisha lying in a pool of blood on their driveway. They called for an ambulance, but Nisha was already unconscious. Fadi was contacted and arrived soon after the paramedics, appearing devastated and in shock. Caton, informed of the incident, hurried to the scene and followed the ambulance to the hospital with Fadi. Tragically, Nisha died half an hour later from a single stab wound to the groin, which severed her femoral artery, causing fatal blood loss. The scene suggested Nisha had been attacked just outside her home, with the perpetrator fleeing immediately after. The quiet, safe neighborhood left neighbors horrified. Initially, police suspected a burglary gone wrong, but the state of the house didn't support this theory. There were no signs of forced entry, and the home was undisturbed. In the living room, 350 pounds in cash, Nisha's earnings from the salon, lay untouched on the sofa, along with her wallet, bank cards, and mobile phone. The only item missing was the largest kitchen knife from one of two knife blocks in the kitchen. Fadi confirmed that all knives had been in place earlier that day, suggesting the attacker took the knife calmly, not in a rush or during a struggle. No blood was found inside the house, indicating the attack occurred outside, and the missing knife was likely the murder weapon taken by the perpetrator. Investigators considered whether Nisha heard a noise, grabbed the knife for protection, and went outside, only to be disarmed and stabbed. Neighbors reported seeing a heavy-set black man in a hooded sweatshirt hurrying away from the scene, with two others noting someone matching that description lingering nearby earlier. The case garnered national attention, appearing on newspaper front pages. Police appealed for information, and Fadi and Caton made public pleas for help in finding Nisha's killer. Detectives questioned Fadi, friends, and neighbors, confirming Fadi's alibi and searching for anyone with a grudge against Nisha or unusual events in her life. Fadi revealed a disturbing incident from 5 days earlier. Two men had attempted to break into their home while Nisha was alone, first trying to trick her into letting them in, then using a crowbar to force the lock. They failed and left, but one of the intruders matched the description of the man seen on the night of the murder. Nisha had been shaken by the attempt, and police found it unlikely to be unrelated. Fadi also disclosed a business dispute from 2 months prior involving a limousine he sold to a woman in Glasgow who ran a car rental business. Fadi had retained the right to borrow the vehicle for prior bookings, but the woman, unhappy with its condition, refused. Fadi took the limousine without permission, leading to heated phone calls, which he recorded and shared with police. Though the woman's threats targeted Fadi, not Nisha, detectives investigated her but quickly ruled her out as a suspect. Meanwhile, the search for the murder weapon continued. 2 weeks later, half a mile from the crime scene, a knife was found embedded in a drainage grate. Though water had likely washed away evidence, traces of Nisha's DNA confirmed it as the murder weapon. No additional clues linked it to the attacker. Police reviewed local surveillance footage and found a critical detail. At 11:30 p.m., shortly after the attack, a silver Audi A4 stopped briefly near a parked car for 7 seconds, its headlights reflecting off the vehicle. The footage was too grainy to read the license plate, but the car had two distinctive features: a non-working license plate light and a roof antenna. With over 18,000 silver Audi A4s registered in southeast England, this lead seemed daunting. Frustrated by slow progress, police examined Fadi's phone and discovered a photo of another woman's naked thigh. Fadi claimed she was just a friend, but evidence suggested otherwise. Confronted, he admitted to a 3-month affair with Laura, a Lithuanian prostitute. Fadi, a regular client, had developed a romantic relationship with her, meeting secretly in hotels, showering her with expensive gifts, and even taking her on a trip to Egypt, claiming he was visiting a sick uncle. This revelation made Fadi the prime suspect. Detectives questioned Laura, exploring whether she and Fadi conspired to kill Nisha to remove her from his life, but concluded Laura was uninvolved. Nisha's family was stunned to learn of Fadi's infidelity. His obsessive worry about what police might find on his phone, he couldn't sleep at night, raised further suspicions. Police discovered Fadi had been in frequent contact with Roger Leslie, a 38-year-old local drug dealer known for violence. Roger, who boasted that his piercings represented his victims, had called Fadi immediately after Nish's attack. Though Roger was elsewhere at the time, police traced another call he made just before contacting Fadi to Emmanuel, a 42-year-old nightclub worker who drove a silver Audi A4 with a roof antenna and a faulty license plate light. Emmanuel was arrested, and Luminol revealed a bloody knife in his car's armrest. Initially uncooperative, he eventually admitted being near Nish's house that night but claimed he only drove someone for a drug deal, unaware it involved murder. He named Jason Jones, a bouncer with 75 prior convictions, as the killer. Emmanuel said Jones used his phone to call Roger and others after the attack, including numbers Emmanuel didn't recognize. He also revealed that Jones mentioned seeing cash in Nish's living room, suggesting the attacker had entered the house. With no signs of a break-in, police concluded the perpetrator had a key, likely provided by Fadi. Further investigation uncovered Fadi's dire financial situation. He had debts exceeding £100,000, and his limousine business was barely profitable. 3 months before Nish's death, she had taken out a life insurance policy naming Fadi as the sole beneficiary, which would pay out £350,000. This gave Fadi a clear motive: financial gain. When presented with the evidence, Fadi broke down sobbing but refused to speak during questioning. Roger, Jason, and Emmanuel also remained silent, responding only with no comment. In February 2007, Fadi, Jason, and Roger were charged with murder, while Emmanuel faced related charges. None pleaded guilty. Police worried that their largely circumstantial evidence might not hold up in court. The trial began in 2008 and lasted 4 months. On May 28th, after 6 days of deliberation, Fadi Nasri and Jason Jones were found guilty of murder and sentenced to life. The judge noted that while financial gain and Fadi's affair with Laura were likely motives, the jury didn't need to prove it was a contract killing. Fadi's extravagant lifestyle, funded by Nish's £60,000 annual salon income, included a luxury Lexus, a stolen £10,000 Hublot watch, and lavish spending on Laura. He had paid Jones £18,000 to kill Nisha. Roger Leslie received a life sentence with a minimum of 18 years, while Emmanuel was acquitted. Fadi's past added context to his character. Before meeting Nisha, he ran a small escort agency, which he disapproved of and convinced him to close. In 1998, he was jailed for 9 months for dangerous driving after hitting a policeman. In 2004, Nisha, as a special constable, received a warning for misusing her badge to help Fadi collect a debt tied to his former escort business. Though the media speculated about her involvement in his shady dealings, the London police clarified that the incident was investigated, and Nisha served honorably thereafter. Fadi's father, Farouk Nasri, had a violent history, convicted of assault in 1994 and accused of murdering his partner and her son in 1999 before taking his own life in custody. Caton, Nisha's brother, condemned the killer's lack of remorse, calling Fadi a coward for targeting a vulnerable woman. He remembered Nisha's warmth, her cheeky smile, and her dedication to others. Detective Chief Inspector Nick Scola, who led the investigation, described the murder as the ultimate betrayal, orchestrated by Fadi for personal gain and to pursue his affair. The conviction brought justice for Nisha, but for her family, the pain of her loss remains. What happened to Juanita Richardson, a mother of 3, initially seemed like a tragic accident. But through the relentless efforts of investigators, a far darker truth emerged. This is the story of a case that took an unexpected turn, revealing hidden motives and a devastating betrayal in a small Michigan town. In June 2006, Juanita and Tom Richardson were preparing to celebrate their 23rd wedding anniversary. The couple, who lived in McBain, a small farming community 186 miles from Pictured Rocks National Lakeshore, had built a life together with their 2 daughters, Lysine and Lindsay, and their son Levi. To their community, they appeared to be a happy, devoted family. Tom, a FedEx truck driver who also taught youth classes at their church, had constructed their log cabin home himself. Juanita worked as a school secretary and sang in the church choir. Despite their long marriage, they still seemed deeply in love, often described as an ideal couple. For their anniversary, Tom and Juanita planned a trip to Pictured Rock's National Lakeshore, a stunning 40-mile stretch of rocky coastline along Lake Superior, known for its dramatic cliffs, waterfalls, and natural arches. The destination held special meaning. It was where they had taken their first trip together years earlier. Tom called it their second honeymoon, a chance to relive cherished memories and escape the routine of daily life. Both avid outdoor enthusiasts, they were drawn to the park's challenging trails and breathtaking views, a perfect setting for adventure and reflection. On June 22, 2006, the fourth day of their vacation, the couple set out for their first hike. It was a cloudy, misty morning, and Juanita snapped photos as they walked along the trail. Around 10:30 a.m., they reached the cliffs, pausing to admire the scenery. They stopped for a snack in their favorite spot, a grassy patch overlooking the lake, where Juanita took a photo of Tom. Shortly after, Tom left to use a restroom at the nearby visitor center, leaving Juanita alone. What happened next comes from Tom's account. He said that when he returned, Juanita was no longer where he had left her. He called her name and searched the area, but found no trace of her. Alarmed, he contacted park authorities, who launched a search operation. For 45 minutes, rangers scoured the area, considering various possibilities. Perhaps Juanita had wandered off and gotten lost, or maybe she had fallen from a cliff, been attacked by a bear, or even been abducted. The optimistic hope was that she would soon reappear, having simply strayed from the spot. But the search ended in tragedy. Juanita's body was found at the base of a 141-foot cliff, a fall equivalent to plummeting from the 14th floor of a building. An autopsy confirmed the obvious. Her death resulted from injuries sustained in the fall. Pictured Rock's National Lakeshore, established in 1966, spans colorful sandstone cliffs, dunes, and waterfalls, attracting nearly 400,000 visitors annually. Until Juanita's death, the park had never recorded such a tragedy. The cliffs, while beautiful, could be treacherous, especially near the edge, where a moment of inattention could prove fatal. With no witnesses to Juanita's fall, the case initially appeared straightforward, an unfortunate accident. Tom was visibly devastated, his grief evident as he broke the news to his children. At the funeral, he stood hand in hand with Lysine, Lindsay, and Levi, drawing strength from their unity in the face of loss. The tragedy seemed to bring the family closer together. Investigators secured the scene and examined the circumstances, but the case might have been closed quickly as an accident if not for inconsistencies that began to surface. Tom was questioned multiple times about his wife's death, and his story changed in significant ways. Initially, he claimed that when he returned from the restroom, Juanita was gone. Later, he said she was there when he returned, saw him, and jump off the cliff intentionally, suggesting suicide. In a third version, he described finding her at the cliff's edge, where she accidentally fell while trying to show him something. These conflicting accounts raised red flags. Only one version could be true, and in two of them, Tom was present at the moment of her death, making him a potential witness or perpetrator. Suspicion turned toward Tom, prompting investigators to dig deeper into his marriage with Juanita. Interviews with friends, acquaintances, and family revealed that their relationship wasn't as perfect as it appeared. Contrary to the image of a blissful couple, Juanita had confided in those closest to her that she was considering divorce due to frequent arguments with Tom. The root of their conflicts went beyond minor disagreements. It emerged that Tom was having an affair with a woman named Kelly, an acquaintance from their community. As the investigation progressed, Tom shifted from a grieving husband to the prime suspect. When questioned about Kelly, Tom denied any romantic involvement, insisting she was a platonic friend with whom he shared a deep religious connection. He claimed their conversations revolved solely around the Bible. However, phone records told a different story. Tom and Kelly had spoken 383 times in less than 9 months. Further, Tom had repeatedly told Kelly that Juanita would soon die from cancer. While Juanita had been diagnosed with a tumor years earlier, it was benign, and she was in excellent health, as evidenced by her enthusiasm for hiking. Allegations of domestic abuse surfaced, but Tom's children staunchly defended him, insisting he treated their mother well. Despite their support, the evidence painted Tom in a troubling light. The investigation uncovered a compelling motive: money. Juanita's life insurance policies would pay Tom nearly $235,000, enough to cover the $243,000 in debts he had accumulated while building their home. This financial incentive shifted the case's narrative. On February 6, 2007, Tom was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Prosecutors argued that he had premeditatedly killed Juanita for financial gain. During the trial, Tom maintained his innocence, insisting he loved Juanita and would never harm her. His defense team argued that the insurance policy cited as the motive initially covered a much smaller amount, and there was no hard evidence against him, only circumstantial clues. They pointed to Juanita's medical history, noting permanent instability in her left knee, which could have caused her to lose balance near the cliff. Tom's final account described witnessing Juanita's accidental fall after she smiled, turned away, and slipped. He claimed to have seen her feet briefly in the air and heard her say, "Oh my God," before fainting from shock and his fear of heights. The prosecution, undeterred, presented additional evidence. They established that Tom had urged Juanita to draft a will shortly before their trip, which a lawyer found unusual for a short vacation. The will named Tom as the sole heir, including the insurance payout. Efforts to prove Tom's affair with Kelly were challenging, as Kelly insisted their relationship was platonic, centered on Bible discussions. A 13-minute phone call between them the day before Juanita's death was described by Kelly as another religious conversation, but investigators remained skeptical. Kelly also admitted receiving gifts from Tom, including earrings for Christmas and, bizarrely, a plant from Juanita's memorial service shortly after her death, an odd gesture for a grieving widower. Despite Kelly's claims, the prosecution couldn't definitively prove a romantic affair, which might have strengthened the motive. Tom reiterated that he and Juanita were in a strong phase of their marriage, denying any plan to replace her with Kelly or kill her for money. He attributed his inconsistent statements to trauma and shock, which he argued clouded his memory, a phenomenon not uncommon among witnesses to traumatic events. Tom's children stood by him throughout the trial, insisting he could never harm their mother. Their support likely influenced the jury's perception. However, Juanita's parents and her sister, Jeanette Ellens, were convinced of Tom's guilt. Jeanette testified about Tom's volatile behavior, citing verbal altercations over finances and his close relationship with Kelly. In an emotional courtroom statement, she called Tom a coward, expressing her anguish over her sister's death and its impact on Juanita's children, who were left without mother. The jury's first vote was split. 7 found Tom guilty, while 5 were unconvinced. During the resumed trial, the prosecution presented a video reconstruction of the fall, using a mannequin, and highlighted a suspicious double bruise on Juanita's right thigh. This injury caught the attention of 2 jurors, who tested whether a nudge to the thigh could cause someone to fall. A journalist's demonstration in court, nudging a juror's thigh and causing him to stumble, lent credence to the theory. A prosecution witness, a former karate instructor, testified that 15 years earlier, Tom had been on track to earn a black belt, suggesting he had the physical ability to deliver a precise blow. The pieces began to align: a remote cliff, a wife with a knee condition, and a husband skilled in martial arts. After 11 hours of deliberation, the jury unanimously found Tom guilty of first-degree murder. At 50 years old, he was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. His children, aged 19, 21, and 23, sat in shock, devastated by the loss of both parents, Juanita to death and Tom to prison. Jeanette, reflecting on the verdict, returned to Pictured Rocks to feel her sister's presence one last time. Listening to the waves and seeing a rainbow over the cliffs, she felt Juanita was at peace, saying, "I'm okay. I'm in better hands now." Tom's subsequent appeals were rejected, cementing his conviction. The tragedy at Pictured Rocks left a family shattered and a community grappling with the chilling reality that a seemingly loving husband had orchestrated his wife's death for financial gain. Flint, Michigan, was a city forged by industry, where hardworking folks built their lives around factories, family, and faith. Bruce Miller was one of them, a dedicated businessman who ran his own scrap metal yard in Genesee County. Known for his kindness and quiet determination, Bruce worked long hours to provide for his wife, Sherry, and their family. To outsiders, the Millers seemed like any other blue-collar couple, navigating the challenges of life in a struggling economy. But beneath the surface, a deadly secret was brewing, one that would turn Bruce's life into a tragic headline. This is the story of what is likely the first murder orchestrated through the internet. While awareness of such dangers has grown significantly since then, cases like this still happen. It's important to learn these stories to understand the risks and recognize warning signs. If you want to know the full story of Bruce and Sherry Miller, stay with me. It was the late 1990s. Bruce Miller, a 46-year-old twice-divorced man, had a deep passion for car racing. That passion led him to open his own scrapyard, where he dealt in automotive parts. At the same time, he eagerly looked forward to retirement. To manage the bookkeeping for his new business, he hired Sherry, a woman 20 years his junior. She was cheerful, always smiling, and full of life. Outside of work, Sherry supplemented her income by selling Mary Kay cosmetics, working under the MLM model. It didn't take long for sparks to fly between Bruce and Sherry. Their professional relationship turned into a passionate affair, leading Bruce to leave his wife. In April 1999, he and Sherry made their relationship official, sealing their union in marriage. Both had children from previous relationships and were excited to form one happy family. Yet, their happiness was short-lived. On November 8, 1999, just 7 months after their wedding, tragedy struck. Bruce was shot in the chest by an unknown assailant. When his brother and wife found him, it was already too late. He died from a gunshot wound while standing behind the counter at his scrapyard. At first, it appeared to be a typical robbery driven by a desire for money, as Bruce usually carried $2,000 in cash to pay for car parts. When his body was found, both the money and his wallet were missing. Sherry had a solid alibi for the time of her husband's murder. During her first conversation with the police, she suggested she had her own theory about who might be responsible. The only known enemy of her husband was their former colleague, John Hutchinson. Sherry had been involved with John before marrying Bruce. Despite John changing jobs, tensions remained between the two men. The relationship with Sherry wasn't the only point of contention. Apparently, John had borrowed money from Bruce and delayed repaying it. There was also an ongoing investigation into car thefts at Bruce's scrapyard, with John being the primary suspect. It's likely that Bruce had pointed the police in John's direction. Revenge could have been the motive for the crime. John was interrogated and subjected to a polygraph test, which he failed. While this wasn't definitive proof of his guilt, as lie detectors are not infallible, it gave the police grounds to consider him the main suspect and search for stronger evidence against him. This would soon become irrelevant as the case took an unexpected turn. It was revealed that a few months after her marriage to Bruce, Sherry met 39-year-old Jerry Cassidy online. This was during the early days of the internet, when one of the first and most recognizable internet service providers was AOL America Online. It was through AOL's chat service that Sherry and Jerry began corresponding. Jerry was from Kansas City, Missouri, born in 1960, and grew up with 3 older brothers. He was a quiet young man who enjoyed fishing trips. After finishing school, he decided to become a police officer. In his career, he met his future wife, Barbara, who worked in the same department. Together, they raised 2 children from Barbara's previous relationship and later had a child of their own. Over the years, Jerry's career in the police force flourished. He was promoted to lieutenant and eventually worked as a detective in the homicide department. His promising career came to an abrupt halt in 1998. Jerry discovered that some of his superiors were involved in falsifying documents and covering up a murder investigation they were working on. Unable to stay silent, he exposed the scandal, which quickly gained widespread attention. The employees involved in the illegal activity were fired, but Jerry was also punished. He was demoted and ostracized by his colleagues. Eventually, he was dismissed under false pretenses, though it was clear the real reason was his whistleblowing on the corruption. This situation took a toll on Jerry's mental health. He loved his job but lost it simply for choosing to act with integrity. The sense of injustice kept him awake at night, and things only got worse when his wife decided to leave him, taking the children with her. Jerry fell into depression and began struggling with prescription drug and alcohol addiction. Despite his mental health issues, he needed to make a living, so he took a job as a security guard in a casino. Later, he moved to Reno, Nevada, where he found similar work, but the late-night lifestyle didn't help him overcome his addictions. Then, hope appeared on the horizon. Through an online chat, Jerry met 26-year-old Sherry. Although he didn't initially know her real name, she used several pseudonyms, all with sexual undertones. Their conversations quickly became explicit. Sherry even sent Jerry nude pictures of herself. She also presented herself as a wealthy businesswoman involved in an ongoing lawsuit that would soon settle, resulting in a substantial sum of money for her. This vision seemed very attractive to Jerry, who had been struggling financially for a long time. However, everything Sherry told him was a lie. She was neither wealthy nor independent. They chatted every day until they finally arranged to meet. Sherry visited Jerry in Nevada, telling her husband she was going on a business trip for Mary Kay. The meeting went exceptionally well, with the couple looking like love-struck teenagers. They talked about the future and even went to look at properties for sale, planning to start a life together. The only obstacle to their plans was Bruce. Sherry told her lover that her husband was abusive, even sending him pictures of bruises she claimed were caused by Bruce. She also said Bruce was involved in the mafia and that she couldn't leave him for fear of her life. It wasn't until much later that it was revealed the supposed injuries had likely been made with makeup. At the time, Jerry believed everything Sherry told him. He was blinded by his feelings for her and didn't consider the possibility that she might be lying or manipulating him. Sherry soon progressed to an even more cruel phase of her plan. She told Jerry she was pregnant with his child and sent him ultrasound pictures, though the images showed a baby from years earlier when she was genuinely pregnant. Sherry lied about her pregnancy twice. She sent Jerry pictures of her supposedly growing belly, claiming she was expecting twins. When it became impossible to maintain the deception, she told Jerry she had lost the babies after Bruce kicked her in the stomach. As you can imagine, this sent Jerry into a rage. Not only had someone harmed the woman he loved, but now they had caused him to lose his children. It's said that Sherry manipulated Jerry twice, both times claiming to be pregnant and suffering a miscarriage. She manipulated him expertly, ensuring he followed her every command. In the end, the desire for revenge grew in Jerry as well. On February 11, 2000, Jerry was found dead in his apartment in Odessa. The 39-year-old was sitting in an easy chair with a Bible in his lap, having suffered a self-inflicted gunshot wound from a .22 caliber rifle. He was found by a family member who decided to check on him after not hearing from him for some time. Jerry's brother, Mike, later found a briefcase with 4 notes. 3 were addressed to different family members, while the 4th instructed him to open the briefcase only in the presence of an attorney. Mike remembered his brother telling him about leaving town in November. According to Mike, if Jerry didn't come back, he asked his brother to look for a briefcase under his bed. Its contents turned out to be linked to a murder case that took place over 750 miles away. There was an unexpected breakthrough in the case of Bruce Miller's murder. The police received a call from a lawyer who had come into possession of evidence left by Jerry, who had written a farewell letter asking his lawyer to hand over the briefcase from under his bed to the police. It contained numerous incriminating pieces of evidence, including printed messages between him and Sherry, as well as a computer hard drive. One of the discovered messages revealed Sherry telling Jerry to simply do it and run, along with directions to a scrapyard owned by Bruce. Inside the briefcase, there was also a letter to his son, his ex-wife, and his parents. In the last letter, he described in detail what he had done and why. He confessed to the murder, saying the guilt had become unbearable. He even disclosed that after committing the murder, he called Sherry using Bruce's phone, using a prearranged signal to let her know he had done what they had planned. From what could be established, shortly after this tragedy, Sherry severed ties with Jerry and found another partner, which likely deepened his depression and may have driven him to take his own life. But before doing so, he ensured the crime would not go unpunished. After thoroughly searching the deceased's apartment, 2 VHS tapes were found in a bin, serving as irrefutable evidence that Jerry and Sherry knew each other and had an intimate relationship. This, along with the contents of the briefcase, was enough to arrest her on suspicion of complicity in her husband's murder. During her interrogation, Sherry initially denied everything, claiming she didn't know Jerry. However, when she realized the strength of the evidence against her, she gradually changed her story and eventually admitted to the affair. She didn't completely abandon her defense of denying everything. She claimed, among other things, that the conversations between her and her lover were fabricated and that they never discussed her husband, let alone conspired to murder him. According to investigators, had Sherry not behaved so cruelly and selfishly, the crime would likely have gone unnoticed. She had an ironclad alibi, and the murderer lived hundreds of miles away from the crime scene, leaving no evidence that could link him to investigators. If she hadn't severed contact with him so heartlessly and treated him unjustly, he likely would never have handed over the evidence to the police that implicated her. Due to the incredible circumstances of the case, it quickly became a media sensation, partly because it was the first known case of the internet being used to incite and plan a murder. Interestingly, most people working on the case at the time had never used a computer, let alone in such an advanced way to utilize the data within it to conduct a criminal case. Because the perpetrator was dead and could not testify, the use of new technology became unavoidable. It was necessary to determine whether the chat records between the accused and her lover had been fabricated, as Sherry claimed, or whether they were genuine. The preparations for trial took several months, even enlisting the help of AOL's browser owner. It's worth noting that while internet activity evidence is now commonly accepted, at the time, there was uncertainty over whether Sherry could be convicted solely on its basis, especially given there was no physical evidence connecting her to the crime scene. In December 2000, Sherry Miller stood trial. It was known that she began actively planning her husband's murder just a few months after their wedding, and the idea likely formed much earlier. One could speculate that she never loved her husband, and the prosecution believed the motive was financial, specifically his Social Security payout and life insurance. At that point, Sherry maintained her innocence. She attempted to portray herself as a victim, claiming that when she tried to end her affair with Jerry, he became aggressive, which led him to frame her to punish her for rejecting him. During the trial, against her lawyer's advice, she decided to testify in her defense. When asked whether the evidence against her was true, she replied affirmatively. It was clear that despite everything, she was convinced the jury would be on her side. She was wrong. Up until that point, Sherry had frequently used her charm to manipulate others. This time, her luck ran out. She succeeded in her murderous plan, but fortunately, it didn't go unnoticed. After 2 days of deliberation, on December 22nd, the jury found Sherry Miller guilty on all charges. On January 29, 2001, Genesee County Circuit Court Judge Judith Fullerton sentenced Miller to life in prison for the conspiracy to commit murder charge and 54 to 81 years for second-degree murder. In 2005, Sherry became the subject of an episode of the American true crime show Snapped, which covers high-profile and unusual cases involving women accused of murder. The episode was watched by Michael Dinor, and the murderer caught his attention. He decided to contact her, and they eventually became a couple. In an interview, Michael said he had been a fan of the show for a long time. But as soon as he saw Sherry on screen, he immediately saw something special in her. Her voice and gaze captivated him. She seemed sad and lonely, so he decided to try to reach out to her. For a while, they corresponded until they officially became a couple and even got engaged. The bliss didn't last long. Sherry hadn't changed at all. She was incapable of genuine emotion. She could only manipulate and remained in romantic relationships only as long as they benefited her. In July 2009, doubts were raised about the legality of the trial and verdict. It was questioned whether evidence related to Jerry's suicide should have been presented during the trial and whether it had unduly influenced the jury's opinion. The decision was made to plan a retrial, and in the meantime, Sherry was released from prison. As soon as she regained her freedom, she immediately broke off her engagement with Michael and treated him just as callously as her previous partners, except he managed to escape with his life. Michael realized he had never truly been important to her, and she discarded him almost like trash as soon as he stopped being useful. It seemed that other people in her life were merely secondary characters who existed to make her life easier. In an interview, he admitted that at first, he truly believed their love was real and that Sherry had been wrongly convicted, but after how she treated him, he understood the verdict had not been unjust. Ultimately, the decision to retry the case was revoked, and Sherry Miller returned to prison to serve the remainder of her sentence. Soon after, she finally admitted to her guilt. In a letter to the judge, she wrote that she wanted Jerry to murder her husband, and as had been suspected, the motive was money. She feared that if her husband found out about the affair, he would divorce her, and she would be left with nothing, which she could not allow. So she decided to eliminate her husband and take his wealth at the same time. Miller is currently serving out her sentence at the Women's Huron Valley Correctional Facility in Ypsilanti, Michigan. In the end, Sherry Miller was convicted for the brutal murder of her husband, Bruce. She had manipulated her lover, Jerry Cassidy, into carrying out the crime. Her actions devastated not only Bruce's family, but also her own children, who were left to cope with the aftermath. Despite her conviction, the damage to her family was irreversible. Sherry's children were raised by their maternal grandmother, far from the turmoil of their mother's crime. The story serves as a stark reminder of how deception and manipulation can destroy lives, leaving a trail of heartbreak in their wake. Bruce Miller's life was tragically cut short, leaving behind a legacy of loss and sorrow. His family and friends remember him as a hardworking man with a kind heart, taken too soon by the manipulation of those he trusted. Rest in peace, Bruce. In the early 1970s, a deeply troubling incident in Canada became one of the most widely known and debated criminal cases of its time. The case involved a man named Guy Paul Morin, whose life took an unexpected and dramatic turn. Morin, a quiet man living in Queensville, Ontario, was accused of a serious crime he did not commit, leading to years of legal battles, public scrutiny, and hardship. Guy Paul Morin was a 24-year-old laborer who lived a peaceful and ordinary life. He had no prior criminal record and was known for being calm and reserved. At the time of the events, Morin lived in a rural town called Queensville, a tight-knit community where everyone knew each other. He had no significant ties to any criminal activities and was just an average young man trying to get by. The incident that would change everything for him took place on October 3, 1984, when 9-year-old Christine Jessup went missing from her home. Her family became worried when she didn't return home after school, and as time passed, their concern turned to fear. Christine's parents reported her missing to the local authorities, and soon a search began for the missing girl. People in the town came together to help, but after hours and days of searching, there were still no signs of Christine. Tragically, on October 13, 1984, Christine's body was found in a wooded area not far from her home. It was a devastating discovery for her family and the community. The cause of death was determined to be murder, and Christine had also been assaulted. The news sent shockwaves through the small town, and law enforcement agencies were under pressure to solve the case. Despite the efforts of law enforcement, no obvious leads emerged, and the police expanded their search for clues. They began to focus on people in the community who might have known Christine or her family. This eventually led them to Guy Paul Morin. Although Morin had no prior connection to the crime, the authorities began to look more closely at him because he lived near the Jessup family and had previously interacted with them in unrelated everyday circumstances. At first, the police had no direct evidence linking Morin to the crime. However, they became interested in his whereabouts on the day Christine disappeared. Morin's alibi was not entirely clear, which caused the police to continue questioning him. This uncertainty, combined with the mounting pressure to solve the case, led investigators to believe he might have been involved. Morin was questioned several times, and his responses were carefully examined. However, there was still no hard evidence connecting him to the crime. Despite this, the police continued to pursue him as their primary suspect. The situation became more complicated when the case received widespread media attention and public opinion became divided. Some believed Morin might be guilty, while others doubted the accusations and questioned the evidence. In the face of growing public and media interest, Guy Paul Morin found himself accused of a crime he had not committed. He was arrested, and the legal proceedings began, marking the start of a long and difficult journey for him. The case was filled with uncertainties, but Morin's life was dramatically altered as he became the central figure in the investigation. As the investigation into the disappearance of Christine Jessup continued, the focus on Guy Paul Morin intensified. Despite a lack of concrete evidence, the police were determined to find a suspect and solve the case. They questioned Morin multiple times, and although he consistently maintained his innocence, the pressure from investigators grew. During the interrogations, Morin became increasingly anxious. The police scrutinized every detail of his statements, searching for any inconsistencies that could suggest guilt. However, Morin's answers remained consistent. He claimed he had nothing to do with Christine's disappearance and had been home during the time of her abduction. Still, the police had doubts about his alibi. He was unable to provide a precise, verifiable account of his whereabouts at the time Christine went missing. This lack of a solid alibi played a significant role in the investigators' decision to focus on him as their primary suspect. As the case moved forward, there was growing pressure on the police to find the culprit. The murder of a young girl was a tragic and highly publicized event, and the police faced public demand for answers. Morin was arrested and charged with Christine Jessup's murder in late 1984, despite the absence of direct evidence connecting him to the crime. The trial began in 1985, and Morin's defense team immediately pointed out the lack of physical evidence that could directly link him to the crime. There were no fingerprints, no DNA, and no other forensic evidence that placed him at the scene of the murder. His defense argued that the case was based on circumstantial evidence, and that the police were wrongfully pursuing him as a suspect. One of the key factors in the case was the testimony of the police officers who had interrogated Morin. They claimed that during questioning, he appeared nervous and gave vague answers. This was used as a basis for suggesting that Morin might be hiding something. However, Morin's defense attorneys argued that his nervousness was the result of being wrongly accused and the stressful nature of the intense questioning. It was common for people in such situations to be anxious or appear uncertain. Despite the lack of solid evidence, the prosecution presented their case with confidence. They argued that Morin's behavior and the inconsistencies in his alibi made him the most likely suspect. The jury was asked to decide based on the circumstantial evidence presented in court. The defense, however, maintained that the case was based on speculation and that there was no real proof that Morin was responsible for Christine's death. After a long and emotional trial, the jury found Guy Paul Morin guilty of first-degree murder in 1985. The verdict shocked many, as it was clear that the evidence against him was far from conclusive. Nevertheless, Morin was sentenced to life in prison, and his case was seen as a tragic example of how the justice system can sometimes fail. For Morin, the conviction was a devastating blow. He had been wrongfully accused and convicted of a crime he did not commit, and now he faced a future in prison for something he had not done. His life, which had once been simple and ordinary, was now consumed by a battle to prove his innocence. Despite being convicted of first-degree murder in 1985, Guy Paul Morin's fight for justice was far from over. While serving his sentence, Morin maintained his innocence, constantly asserting that he had been wrongfully convicted. The case against him, built mostly on circumstantial evidence, had left many questions unanswered. It wasn't long before his legal team began looking for new avenues to challenge the conviction. In 1992, after spending 7 years in prison, a breakthrough came. Advances in forensic science, particularly DNA analysis, provided an opportunity to revisit the evidence in the case. A key factor in Morin's appeal was the discovery of new DNA evidence that could potentially exonerate him. In the early 1990s, DNA testing was becoming more widely available, and the possibility of using it to re-examine old cases was gaining traction. The DNA testing focused on the evidence collected from the crime scene, including the victim's clothing. The results showed that the DNA found at the scene did not match Guy Paul Morin. In fact, it was a match to another individual entirely. This new development cast doubt on the validity of the initial conviction and raised serious concerns about the fairness of the trial. The DNA evidence directly contradicted the assumption that Morin had been the perpetrator, and it was clear that the evidence had not been properly examined during the initial trial. In light of this new evidence, Morin's legal team filed an appeal, arguing that the original conviction was based on flawed reasoning and insufficient evidence. The appeal was heard in 1992, and after carefully considering the new forensic findings, the court decided to overturn Morin's conviction. The DNA evidence proved that Morin had not been the one to commit the crime, and as a result, he was exonerated after spending 7 years in prison for a crime he did not commit. The news of Morin's exoneration sent shockwaves through the Canadian legal system. It raised serious questions about the integrity of the initial investigation and trial. Many people were left wondering how such a miscarriage of justice had occurred and how someone had been wrongfully convicted for such a serious crime without the necessary evidence. The case became a powerful reminder of the importance of careful investigation, fairness, and the need for proper evidence in any legal proceeding. For Guy Paul Morin, his exoneration marked the beginning of a long process of rebuilding his life. After spending years behind bars, he was free, but the emotional and psychological toll of being wrongfully convicted was profound. Morin faced the difficult task of trying to piece together the years he had lost and coming to terms with the trauma he had endured. In the aftermath of the case, Morin received compensation for the wrongful conviction, and his case became a significant example of how the justice system can sometimes fail. It highlighted the need for greater accountability, particularly when it comes to the use of forensic evidence and the importance of ensuring that innocent people are not wrongfully imprisoned. Morin's case also led to widespread reforms in Canada, particularly in the way the legal system handles DNA evidence and wrongful convictions. Though Morin was exonerated, the case of Christine Jessup remained unresolved for many years. The true identity of her killer was not known, and the community was left without answers. It was only years later, in 2007, that another man who had been convicted of a separate crime was identified through DNA testing as the actual perpetrator of Christine Jessup's murder. This discovery, which came long after Morin had been exonerated, provided some measure of closure to the case. Guy Paul Morin's wrongful conviction became one of the most well-known cases in Canada, serving as a cautionary tale about the dangers of rushing to judgment and the consequences of relying on circumstantial evidence. It also highlighted the importance of advancements in forensic science and how they can play a crucial role in uncovering the truth. In 1959, Canada was shaken by a crime that would leave a lasting impact on its legal system. The case began in a quiet part of Ontario, where a young girl named Lynn Harper went missing. Lynn, only 12 years old at the time, lived with her family in the small town of Clinton, Ontario. Her disappearance on June 9th marked the beginning of an intense investigation that would eventually lead to one of the most controversial criminal trials in Canadian history. The suspect in this case was Stephen Truscott, a 14-year-old boy who lived in the same town as Lynn. Stephen was known to his classmates and teachers as a quiet and reserved teenager, someone who didn't stand out much in a crowd. He was an ordinary student at the local high school with no prior criminal history or any known issues with the law. At first, there was nothing about Stephen's life that seemed unusual, and he was considered a friendly, though somewhat shy young man. On the day Lynn disappeared, she had been seen leaving her home in the afternoon. Her parents became concerned when she didn't return by evening, and they contacted the authorities. The search for the young girl began immediately, but no clues were found in the initial hours. Over the next few days, the community rallied together to look for Lynn, but there was still no sign of her. It wasn't until June 12th, 3 days after her disappearance, that Lynn's body was discovered. She had been found in a wooded area near a creek just outside of Clinton. The cause of death was later determined to be strangulation, and the small town was left in shock and mourning. The loss of the young girl, coupled with the brutal nature of her death, left many in the community searching for answers. As the investigation unfolded, the police began questioning people who had been close to Lynn, including her family and friends. They soon turned their attention to Stephen Truscott, who had been seen near the area where Lynn's body was found. Stephen initially became a suspect because he had been one of the last people to be seen with Lynn before she disappeared. He had been riding his bike on the same road where Lynn was last spotted, and the two had crossed paths that afternoon. At first, Stephen maintained that he had not seen Lynn after they briefly spoke that afternoon. He said he had gone on to meet a friend, had no further interaction with Lynn. But as investigators began to piece together details from his statements, they found inconsistencies. His story appeared to have gaps, and the police began to suspect he might know more about Lynn's disappearance than he was letting on. During the investigation, the police learned that Stephen had been arrested previously for a minor offense, but there was no significant record of trouble with the law. Despite his young age, the pressure on him grew as investigators began to focus on him more intensely. Stephen was subjected to several rounds of questioning. In one of these sessions, he changed his account of the events surrounding Lynn's disappearance, which only fueled suspicions. The police began to look at Stephen more seriously as a suspect. even though there was no physical evidence linking him directly to the crime. As they delved deeper into his behavior and statements, they found that his responses to certain questions seemed unclear or contradictory. This, combined with the growing pressure to solve the case, led them to focus on Stephen as their prime suspect. The fact that he was one of the last people to see Lynn added to the suspicion surrounding him. Though there was no clear evidence tying Stephen to the murder, the authorities decided to charge him with the death of Lynn Harper. The investigation was built largely on circumstantial evidence and Stephen's inconsistent statements. His trial, which began shortly after his arrest, would become a highly publicized event. In the trial, the prosecution relied on Stephen's supposed confession, which had been extracted during an intense police interrogation. Stephen had reportedly admitted to the crime, but his defense team argued that the confession was coerced under duress. The pressure placed on him during hours of questioning had led him to make statements that were not entirely accurate. The confession was central to the case against Stephen, and the prosecution argued that it was evidence of his guilt. The trial of Stephen Truscott began in the fall of 1959, just months after Lynn Harper's tragic death. At the young age of 14, Stephen found himself at the center of a legal battle that would determine the rest of his life. The case quickly garnered significant attention both locally and nationally. The courtroom was filled with spectators and media eager to see the young boy who had been accused of such a horrific crime. The prosecution was determined to convict him, and the defense team was focused on proving his innocence. The prosecution's case was largely built on Stephen's confession. They argued that Stephen had admitted to killing Lynn, and therefore he was guilty. However, there were several issues with his confession that raised doubts about its legitimacy. The defense team argued that Stephen had been coerced into confessing under duress, as the police had employed aggressive tactics during their questioning. Stephen's defense lawyer, in particular, pointed out that the confession lacked details that a person would reasonably know if they were actually responsible for the crime. The prosecution claimed that Stephen had confessed to killing Lynn, but his confession did not match up with some of the known facts of the crime. There was no physical evidence that placed Stephen at the scene of the murder, such as fingerprints or blood traces, which should have been a red flag in the case. Additionally, there was the issue of Stephen's age. At just 14 years old, he was still a child, and the defense argued that he may not have fully understood the consequences of his confession or the legal implications of what he was saying. A confession made by a young teenager under such intense pressure was unreliable and should not have been the sole basis for his conviction. The defense further suggested that Stephen was simply trying to please the police and make the questioning stop. Despite these concerns, the jury was convinced by the prosecution's argument and found Stephen Truscott guilty of first-degree murder. The trial lasted only a few days, and the evidence presented was largely circumstantial. The lack of physical evidence, the issues with confession, and the absence of any real motive for Stephen to kill Lynn were largely ignored by the jury. In the eyes of the legal system at the time, confession was enough to convict him. After his conviction, Stephen Truscott was sentenced to death by hanging, a decision that shocked many. People from all walks of life, including those who knew Stephen personally, struggled to accept that a young boy could have committed such a violent crime. Some members of the public began to question whether justice had truly been served. They wondered whether Stephen's conviction had been based on flawed reasoning and rushed decisions. Despite the conviction, there were many who believed Stephen was innocent. His family, friends, and some members of the community were convinced that the real killer had never been found. The entire town of Clinton was left stunned, as many people struggled to believe that a young boy, just 14 years old, could be responsible for such a brutal crime. The courtroom was filled with reporters, and the case captured national attention. In the face of mounting pressure to solve the murder of Lynn Harper, Stephen's fate seemed to be sealed. Even though Stephen's case seemed to be closed, the growing public concern about his innocence did not fade. Over the years, a number of individuals, including legal experts and journalists, began to take a closer look at the case. As more people began to question the fairness of his trial, Stephen's case gained attention beyond the small town of Clinton. His supporters called for a re-examination of the evidence, and many believed that the true perpetrator had never been caught. For them, the case against Stephen Truscott seemed incomplete and based on a flawed investigation. In the years following his conviction, Stephen's sentence was eventually commuted from death by hanging to a life sentence in prison. But the battle to prove his innocence continued. His case was often cited as an example of how the justice system can sometimes make tragic mistakes, especially when it comes to the treatment of young offenders. The question remained, could Stephen Truscott have been wrongfully convicted? For years, Stephen Truscott languished in prison, serving his life sentence despite growing doubts about his guilt. The case remained a source of controversy, and over time, calls for a re-examination of the evidence became louder. Many believe that Stephen had been wrongfully convicted, and his case became a symbol of how a young person's life could be ruined by an unjust legal system. In the 1970s, as new forensic techniques began to emerge, there was renewed hope for a breakthrough in the case. One of the most important advancements in criminal investigations during this time was the development of DNA testing, which allowed for more accurate and reliable analysis of physical evidence. Stephen's legal team began pushing for the case to be reopened, hoping that modern forensic methods could provide new insights and help clear his name. For years, the case went through a slow process of appeals and legal battles. Stephen's supporters argued that he had been a victim of a rushed investigation and a flawed trial. They believed that the original investigation had failed to explore other potential suspects and that Stephen's confession had been coerced. Furthermore, there were no physical traces or evidence linking him to the crime scene, which raised serious doubts about his involvement. In 1997, Stephen's case received a significant boost when an investigative reporter, known for his focus on wrongful convictions, uncovered new evidence that had never been considered before. This led to increased media attention and public support for Stephen. As a result, in 2001, the Ontario Court of Appeal decided to take a fresh look at his case. During the appeal, Stephen's defense team presented new arguments about the unreliability of the evidence used to convict him. They highlighted the fact that the confession had been obtained under duress and lacked crucial details about the crime. The team also argued that the prosecution had failed to explore all possible leads, especially when it came to other suspects who could have been responsible for Lynn Harper's death. Additionally, the failure of the police to properly investigate and rule out other potential culprits weakened the case against Stephen. One of the most important developments in the case was the re-examination of forensic evidence. New DNA tests were conducted on the materials found at the crime scene. The DNA evidence was inconclusive and failed to connect Stephen to the murder. There were no matching DNA samples found on Lynn's body, which raised significant doubts about Stephen's involvement. The tests also revealed that key pieces of evidence had been mishandled or overlooked during the initial investigation. After years of legal wrangling, the Ontario Court of Appeal finally ruled in 2007 that Stephen Truscott had been wrongfully convicted. The court determined that there had been significant errors in the way the case was handled and acknowledged the doubts surrounding his confession. The court overturned Stephen's conviction, and he was exonerated after spending over 40 years of his life in prison. Stephen Truscott's exoneration was a moment of justice, but it was also bittersweet. He had spent more than 4 decades behind bars for a crime he did not commit, and much of his life had been lost to the wrongfully imposed punishment. Although Stephen was now free, he struggled to rebuild his life after his release. The trauma of his wrongful conviction, combined with the emotional toll of being imprisoned for so many years, was something that could never be fully erased. Stephen Truscott's case became one of the most high-profile wrongful conviction cases in Canadian history. It prompted widespread discussions about the flaws in the criminal justice system, particularly regarding the treatment of young offenders and the use of confessions obtained under duress. The case also served as a reminder of the importance of forensic evidence in criminal investigations and led to a re-evaluation of how cases are handled in Canada. In the years following his exoneration, Stephen worked to raise awareness about wrongful convictions. He became an advocate for justice reform and dedicated much of his life to helping others who had been wrongly accused or convicted. He also sought to help others understand the personal and emotional toll that a wrongful conviction can have on an individual and their family. The case of Stephen Truscott had a lasting impact on Canadian law and justice. His exoneration helped strengthen the calls for reform within the criminal justice system, particularly in the areas of how confessions are obtained and how young offenders are treated. The case also highlighted the importance of modern forensic techniques, such as DNA testing, in ensuring that justice is served and that wrongful convictions are corrected. In the end, Stephen Truscott's story is one of resilience, determination, and the pursuit of justice. His wrongful conviction was a tragic chapter in Canadian history, But his eventual exoneration showed that even the most flawed legal system can be corrected when the truth is revealed. His case remains a powerful reminder of the importance of fairness, thorough investigations, and the rights of the accused in the criminal justice system. In 1972, one of the most notorious criminal cases in Canada centered on Richard Cournoyer, a man whose actions would reshape the landscape of criminal investigations across the country. Born in 1948 in Montreal, Quebec, Cournoyer's troubled upbringing and deep ties to the criminal underworld propelled him toward a series of violent acts that stunned both his local community and the nation at large. Cournoyer grew up in a working-class family in Montreal, where financial struggles and a strained relationship with his parents defined his early years. As a child, he displayed rebellious tendencies, frequently landing in trouble with the law for minor offenses such as shoplifting and vandalism. By his teenage years, he had fallen in with local gangs, engaging in petty crimes like theft and assaults. His early criminal exploits made him a familiar figure in Montreal's rougher neighborhoods, earning him a reputation as a troublemaker. As Cournoyer entered adulthood, his criminal activities escalated. He became deeply entrenched in Montreal's organized crime scene, working alongside some of the city's most infamous figures. His connections to these syndicates positioned him as a key player in smuggling operations, theft rings, and illegal gambling networks. Cournoyer developed a particular knack for stealing high-value items, jewelry, firearms, vehicles, and funneling them through underground markets. His involvement with criminal gangs cemented his status as a dangerous individual. Described as cold and calculating, Cournoyer was unafraid to resort to violence to achieve his aims. His volatile temper and disregard for the law earned him a fearsome reputation, as he showed no hesitation in committing extreme acts when necessary. By 1972, his criminal career took a darker turn, aligning with a surge of violent bank robberies that began in Montreal and spread across Canada. Cournoyer's gang was linked to a series of audacious heists throughout the city. These were not impulsive thefts but carefully orchestrated operations involving armed men storming banks and demanding large sums of money. The robberies often unfolded in broad daylight, with Cournoyer and his crew using intimidation and force to control the scene. Bank tellers and customers were held at gunpoint, and the perpetrators showed little regard for the safety of bystanders. Despite Cournoyer's growing notoriety, the police struggled to apprehend him. His gang operated with precision, often escaping before law enforcement could respond. Cournoyer's criminal network expanded, and he evaded capture through cunning tactics. He used multiple aliases, frequently altered his appearance, and maintained a low profile when not actively committing crimes. However, the spring of 1972 marked a turning point. A series of increasingly violent acts drew the attention of authorities, setting the stage for a breakthrough in the investigation and the unraveling of Cournoyer's criminal empire. This year would ignite one of the most significant manhunts in Canadian history. By 1972, Cournoyer's operations had reached new heights of violence and sophistication. His involvement in high-profile Montreal robberies became a pressing concern for law enforcement, as his gang grew bolder with each heist. The most infamous of these took place on April 15, 1972, at the Royal Bank branch on St. Catherine Street, a bustling hub in downtown Montreal. The heist began shortly after the bank opened, as the first wave of customers trickled in. Cournoyer's crew, disguised as ordinary citizens, entered with calm precision. Heavily armed with pistols and shotguns, they stormed the main floor, ordering everyone to the ground. The robbers demanded that tellers open the vault while Cournoyer oversaw the hostages, ensuring no one dared to resist. The gang's discipline was striking. They moved with chilling efficiency, betraying their experience in such operations. The robbery was over in less than 10 minutes, yet in that brief window, they escaped with over $350,000, a staggering sum for the time. Fleeing in a stolen vehicle, they vanished into Montreal's crowded streets. The Royal Bank heist was not an isolated incident. Over the following months, Cournoyer's gang executed similar robberies, targeting other prominent banks across Montreal. Each followed a familiar pattern: meticulous planning, rapid execution, and a swift getaway. The police were left grasping at straws, with no solid leads. Witnesses described the robbers as well-dressed, gloved, and eerily professional, but none could positively identify Cournoyer, who took great care to disguise himself during these crimes. Kunoir's ability to remain elusive frustrated law enforcement. His gang seemed untouchable, expanding their operations beyond robberies to include stolen cars, weapons, and drug trafficking. Their criminal web spanned the city, but Kunoir's growing success came at cost. His violent methods and ruthless dealings drew the ire of rival gangs, and tensions began to simmer. The constant threat of betrayal or confrontation made their operations increasingly precarious. Yet Kunoir pressed on undeterred, plotting new heists as his gang's reputation for fearlessness spread through the underworld. However, as often happens with criminals who grow too bold, Kunoir's recklessness would prove his undoing. The escalation of violence not only heightened public fear, but also intensified police scrutiny. The Montreal police force launched a determined investigation, while rival gangs began viewing Kunoir's crew as a dangerous liability. The turning point came on June 8, 1972, when Kunoir's gang targeted a bank in a wealthier part of the city, a risky move that drew unwanted attention. Unbeknownst to them, the police had been tracking their activities for weeks, thanks to an anonymous tip. As the robbers stormed the bank during the afternoon rush hour, law enforcement was already positioned nearby. The heist unfolded as planned, but as Kunoir's crew fled with the loot, they were met by a waiting squad of officers. A high-speed chase tore through Montreal's streets, with Kunoir's vehicle weaving through traffic in a desperate bid for freedom. The pursuit ended when the robbers were cornered in a dead-end street. Attempting to flee on foot, Kunoir drew a handgun and bolted for an alley, but the police were relentless. He was apprehended at gunpoint, along with his gang members. Several firearms and stolen cash were recovered, marking the end of Kunoir's reign of terror. The subsequent investigation revealed the full scope of Kunoir's criminal network. His gang was tied to at least a dozen major robberies, numerous car thefts, and violent clashes with rival factions. Authorities also uncovered evidence of drug trafficking and illegal firearms sales, exposing the depth of his operations. Kunoir's trial began later that year, with charges including multiple counts of robbery, assault with a deadly weapon, conspiracy to commit theft, organized crime, and drug trafficking. His defense team argued that Kunoir's troubled upbringing and the influence of his criminal associates had coerced him into a life of crime. However, the evidence was overwhelming, and he was found guilty on most counts. In 1973, Richard Kunoir was sentenced to 25 years in prison, with his gang members receiving varying sentences, some reduced in exchange for cooperation with authorities. Defiant to the end, Kunoir maintained his innocence, claiming he had been framed by the police. Kunoir's case became one of the most high-profile criminal sagas of the 1970s in Canada, sending a stark warning to the criminal underworld. Law enforcement in Montreal and beyond intensified their focus on organized crime, allocating more resources to dismantle syndicates. His capture prompted significant changes in how police tackled major crimes, particularly armed robberies and gang activity. Though Kunoir was behind bars, his legacy endured as a cautionary tale of the perils of organized crime and the violence it breeds. His story ushered in a new era of proactive law enforcement in Canada, with authorities adopting more aggressive strategies to combat criminal gangs. In 1972, one of the most infamous criminal events in Canada unfolded in Montreal, a tragedy known as the Montreal Massacre. This act of shocking violence, perpetrated by Pierre Ledger, will become notorious not only for its brutality, but also for the troubled past that shaped its architect. Born in 1948 in the working-class neighborhood of Verdun, Montreal, Pierre Ledger grew up in a chaotic household. His parents' constant arguments and the hardships of poverty defined his early years. By his teenage years, Ledger had already run afoul of the law, arrested multiple times for petty theft and minor offenses. Despite showing some academic promise, his fascination with the criminal world overshadowed any potential for a different path. In his early 20s, he joined a small local gang, engaging in low-level crimes like theft and vandalism. Initially, his criminal activities seemed relatively harmless, but they soon escalated. By 1972, Ledger was entangled in a series of more violent crimes, including assaults and robberies. His growing ties to Montreal's criminal underworld led to his recruitment by some of the city's most dangerous figures. These organized crime syndicates involved him in drug trafficking, prostitution rings, and the theft of high-value items. Over time, Ledger became deeply entrenched in this dark world, and his crimes grew increasingly perilous. His violent tendencies became more pronounced, with reports of brutal confrontations and attacks on rival gang members. Though his name was not yet widely known outside Montreal, within the criminal community, Ledger inspired fear. Known for his lack of empathy and quick temper, Ledger earned a reputation as a man who relished carrying out violent acts without remorse. Some even said he took pleasure in his victims' suffering. In the summer of 1972, a string of failed heists and rising tensions within his criminal circle pushed Ledger's mental state to the brink. Personal setbacks, including his father's death and a failed romantic relationship, compounded his instability. Coupled with a worsening drug addiction, these factors drove him to a dangerous edge. By late summer, his behavior grew erratic, and he began taking extreme measures to assert his dominance in the underworld. Meanwhile, Montreal's law enforcement community was taking notice of Ledger's escalating criminal activities. Though he had evaded capture for years, his violent reputation drew increasing scrutiny. Authorities were determined to bring him to justice before his crimes grew even more severe. However, it was in the fall of 1972 that Pierre Ledger would cement his infamy, not just as a criminal, but as the perpetrator of a tragic act of violence that would reverberate across the nation. As 1972 progressed, Ledger's recklessness and violence intensified. His deeper involvement in Montreal's organized crime networks only fueled his aggressive tendencies. By this point, he had alienated many former associates who now viewed him as unpredictable and dangerous. While some still valued his willingness to handle risky tasks, his erratic behavior made him a liability. Ledger's personal life was unraveling as well. The emotional toll of his violent career, combined with substance abuse, plunged him into isolation and anger. He showed no regard for consequences and no fear of the law. His growing paranoia fed a belief that he was being persecuted, which he used to justify his increasingly extreme actions. Ledger began frequenting notorious criminal hangouts, bars, underground gambling dens, where he mingled with gang members and engaged in illegal activities like black market weapons trading and drug distribution. His temper became legendary. Heated arguments often ended in violence, with reports of physical assaults on both rivals and strangers. Ledger's violent streak was no longer confined to the criminal world. He was becoming a danger to everyone around him. Yet he remained elusive, avoiding detection by frequently changing his appearance and using aliases. He trusted only those who served his immediate needs. Still, his violent reputation was making him a target for police investigations into organized crime. His name surfaced in connection to unsolved robberies and violent incidents, but authorities lacked concrete evidence to pin him down. Ledger's skill at covering his tracks and avoiding identification frustrated investigators. Within Montreal's fractured criminal underworld, rivalries deepened, and Ledger's reckless behavior made enemies even among former allies. His growing paranoia reached a fever pitch as he began to suspect betrayal from those around him, even within his own circles. This sense of persecution drove him to plan revenge against anyone he believed had wronged him. By this point, Ledger was no longer a petty criminal or small-time thug. He had become a figure capable of extreme violence, detached from reality and indifferent to the consequences of his actions. He viewed those around him as obstacles, threats to his authority that needed to be eliminated. The stage was set for an act of violence that no one could have foreseen. On the evening of October 16, 1972, Pierre Ledger carried out a crime that would etch his name into Canadian criminal history. For weeks, he had been consumed by anger and frustration, meticulously planning an act of retribution. His deteriorating mental state convinced him that only extreme violence could restore his sense of control. He targeted a local gambling den, a known hub for organized crime figures, located in the heart of Montreal. Armed with a .38 caliber revolver, Ledger entered the den during its busiest hour. The room was packed with gamblers, some as rivals, others simply there to make quick money. Without warning, he opened fire, the revolver's blasts echoing in the dimly lit space. Panic erupted as people dove for cover. In the chaos, Ledger continued shooting, targeting specific individuals he held grudges against, his movements chillingly methodical. The brutality was staggering. He fired round after round, showing no hesitation, When the gunfire ceased, 3 men lay dead, and 5 others were gravely injured. Remarkably, Ledger did not flee immediately. He walked out of the den with an eerie calm, as if the massacre were a routine task. Witnesses later described his cold, calculated demeanor, as though he had rehearsed the act countless times in his mind. The police responded swiftly, and news of the massacre spread like wildfire across Montreal. But Ledger had vanished, slipping into the city's maze of alleys and streets. An intensive manhunt ensued, with authorities combing the city, interviewing witnesses, and investigating Ledger's known associates. His escape was brief. Days later, a local resident spotted him near Montreal's outskirts. Acting on a tip, police surrounded his location, leading to a tense standoff. Cornered and desperate, Ledger attempted to flee but was quickly apprehended. He offered no resistance as he was taken into custody. Ledger was charged with multiple counts of murder, attempted murder, and illegal possession of firearms. His trial, which began in 1973, became one of Canada's most publicized cases. His defense team argued that Ledger suffered from severe mental health issues, driven to violence by his troubled upbringing and the pressures of the criminal underworld. The prosecution, however, painted him as a cold-blooded killer who had planned the massacre with precision, targeting specific individuals for personal vendettas. They highlighted his long history of violence, arguing that the attack was the culmination of years of escalating criminal behavior. The evidence was damning, and the jury found Pierre Ledger guilty on all charges. He was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years. The verdict brought some closure to the victims' families and the city of Montreal, but it also served as a grim reminder of the dangers posed by those entrenched in the criminal underworld. The Montreal Massacre became a landmark case in Canadian criminal law, underscoring the devastating potential of organized crime and unchecked rage. Pierre Ledger's story lingered in the public consciousness as a chilling example of how personal vengeance and criminal entanglement can lead to unthinkable violence. His name became synonymous with the dark underbelly of Montreal's criminal past, a tragic testament to the destructive path forged by turmoil and crime. In the early 1970s, Albert Elwood, a man whose life veered sharply into crime, became a central figure in one of Canada's most infamous criminal events. Born in 1935 in Toronto, Ontario, Wood endured a challenging childhood marked by poverty and an unstable home life. These early struggles set the stage for a series of petty crimes in his teenage years, laying the foundation for his later descent into more serious criminal endeavors. Wood was a reserved man, often fading into the background in social settings. He had few close friends and preferred solitude, but his criminal activities were steadily drawing attention. By the early 1970s, he had established himself as a small-time crook, engaging in theft, burglary, and fraud. Cautious and methodical, Wood planned his crimes carefully to avoid detection. In 1972, seeking a fresh start after a string of failed ventures in Ontario, he relocated to Montreal. There, he quickly integrated into the city's criminal networks, crossing paths with seasoned criminals and organized crime syndicates. One such group, led by a notorious figure named Tony DeMarco, played a pivotal role in shaping Wood's criminal career. The DeMarco crew was infamous in Montreal for its involvement in drug trafficking, smuggling, and robbery. Initially a peripheral member, Wood seized an opportunity to take on a more prominent role when the crew devised an audacious plan to rob the Bank of Montreal, one of Canada's largest banks, in 1972. The heist was ambitious, a daytime strike to steal millions in cash and vanish without a trace. This meticulously planned operation would propel Wood to new heights in the criminal underworld. The plan took shape in early 1972, with Wood collaborating closely with DeMarco and other members of the network. The robbery was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon, the bank's busiest time, to maximize chaos and minimize the chance of witnesses providing clear descriptions to police. The goal was to overwhelm staff and customers with speed and precision, ensuring a swift escape. Wood, known for his calm and composed demeanor, was tasked with overseeing the execution of the heist. His experience and knowledge of criminal tactics made him ideal for the role, but this operation demanded far more than a simple smash and grab. The plan involved using multiple vehicles to create diversions and delay police response while the crew moved through the bank. Speed was critical, using the terror and confusion of the initial confrontation to grab as much cash as possible and flee. In the months leading up to the heist, Wood displayed little emotion, maintaining a professional air that earned him respect among his peers. His lack of visible anxiety signaled his full commitment to the task. To those who worked with him, Wood was a man who thrived under pressure. Despite the careful planning, challenges abounded. The crew had to contend with surveillance cameras, security protocols, and the possibility of a swift law enforcement response. They spent weeks studying the bank's operations, analyzing its security measures, and even infiltrating the staff to gather critical intelligence. Wood's prior encounters with law enforcement had taught him valuable lessons, and he approached this heist with heightened caution. As the day of the robbery neared, tension gripped the crew, but Wood's steady demeanor remained unshaken, as if the operation were just another job. On the morning of April 7, 1972, everything was in place. The crew was prepared, the logistics finalized. Wood, standing by his apartment door awaiting his partners, recognized this as a defining moment, one that could lead to wealth and freedom or a catastrophic fall. That afternoon, Wood and his crew, composed of seasoned criminals, arrived at the Bank of Montreal on St. Catherine Street in Montreal. Dressed in everyday clothing, they blended seamlessly with the bustling downtown crowd. The plan was straightforward: strike quickly, subdue the staff and customers, and escape with as much cash as possible. As they entered the bank, resistance was immediate, but Wood and his armed crew, wielding firearms, swiftly took control. They rushed the tellers, ordering them to fill bags with money, while other members kept the patrons at bay. Wood, the orchestrator, remained calm and methodical, ensuring every move was executed with precision. For the next 15 minutes, the bank descended into chaos. Customers cowered, some dropping to the floor in fear, others frozen in shock. Wood moved decisively, leaving nothing to chance. The crew had been instructed to avoid violence if possible, and he enforced this, though the tension was palpable. Outside, getaway vehicles were strategically positioned to block streets and create distractions, delaying the police who patrol the area. The robbery unfolded as planned, and by the time law enforcement arrived, the crew had vanished into Montreal's streets, leaving no trace. The haul was staggering, millions in cash. Rather than spending it immediately, the crew had a sophisticated plan to launder the money through various channels to conceal its origins. For weeks, Wood and his accomplices stayed out of sight, evading police who were left without leads. The robbery's precision and the lack of identifiable witnesses stymied the investigation. However, the discovery of an abandoned getaway car miles from the scene marked a turning point. Though physical evidence was scarce, Montreal police suspected the involvement of an organized crime group. Wood remained in hiding, and the crew celebrated their success in secrecy, living in the shadows. Law enforcement intensified their efforts, conducting raids on suspected criminal networks. In early May, a breakthrough came when one of Wood's associates, under pressure, turned informant. This insider provided critical details about the heist's planning and execution. On May 18, 1972, police raided Wood's hideout, arresting him without incident. Though he initially denied involvement, the evidence was overwhelming. The prosecution had amassed information about his extensive criminal history and ties to Montreal's organized crime groups. Wood's arrest was a significant victory for law enforcement, but was only the beginning of a broader investigation into the city's underworld. Wood's trial began in late 1972, captivating public attention. His calm demeanor during the robbery had been key to its success, but it also sealed his fate. The evidence, combined with his connections to organized crime, made it clear this was no impulsive theft. He faced charges of robbery, conspiracy, and possession of stolen property. In the end, Albert L. Wood was convicted of what became known as the Great Canadian Bank Robbery and sentenced to 25 years in prison. The heist marked one of the largest and most meticulously planned robberies in Canadian history, cementing its place in the nation's criminal lore. Wood's life in the underworld came to an abrupt halt, serving as a stark reminder of the lengths some would go to for wealth and power. After serving his sentence, Wood was released in the early 1990s. Prison had changed him, and he kept a low profile, fully aware that his name was now synonymous with one of Montreal's most infamous crimes. Albert L. Wood's story stands as a testament to the unpredictable nature of crime and its consequences, a tale of ambition, meticulous planning, and the inevitable price paid for a life of criminality. John Jack McGuire was born in 1945 in Toronto, Ontario, in a working-class neighborhood where life's harsh realities were ever present. His father toiled in a factory, barely scraping by, while his mother worked tirelessly to support the family. Growing up amid financial instability, McGuire developed a deep resentment toward authority figures. As a teenager, he dabbled in petty theft, but it wasn't long before he was drawn into more serious criminal ventures. McGuire's entry into Toronto's criminal underbelly came through connections to organized crime syndicates. He quickly earned a reputation as a skilled and ambitious thief, unafraid of high-risk jobs that others avoided. Known for his meticulous planning, calm demeanor, and ability to stay cool under pressure, he became a valuable asset in the criminal world. By the early 1970s, McGuire was a prominent figure in Toronto's underworld, having pulled off several successful heists that cemented his status as one of the city's most talented and elusive thieves. His knack for staying one step ahead of the police earned him both fear and admiration among his peers. In 1973, a group approached McGuire with a proposal for one of the most daring robberies in Canadian history, targeting the Toronto Dominion Bank, a prestigious institution renowned for its secure vaults and vast wealth. The job demanded precision and a skilled team to bypass the bank's advanced security systems. With his expertise in orchestrating high-stakes heists and his extensive underworld connections, McGuire was the obvious choice to lead the operation. The plan was to infiltrate the bank's vault, rumored to hold millions in cash and valuable documents. The crew needed to disable security systems, access the vault, and escape without a trace. The heist was set for the evening of April 3, 1973. McGuire and his team spent weeks preparing, studying the bank's security measures, guard schedules, and escape routes. The bank's defenses were formidable, with motion detectors, surveillance cameras, and a heavy guard presence. The vault, buried deep within the building, was protected by a reinforced steel door and a complex locking mechanism. Any mistake could doom the operation and lead to their capture. McGuire's crew gathered sophisticated tools, including cutting-edge burglary equipment, forged documents, and radios for communication. He ensured each member was well-versed in their role, prepared for unexpected obstacles. Despite the heist's complexity, McGuire's confidence stemmed from his history of successful robberies and evading the law. His crew trusted his leadership, aware of the risks but enticed by the promise of millions, enough to set them up for life. The plan was straightforward: infiltrate the bank late at night, disable the security systems, access the vault, and escape undetected. McGuire arranged multiple escape routes and contingency plans. As the date approached, tension among the crew grew, but McGuire's steady presence kept them focused. On the evening of April 3, 1973, the team gathered at a safe house near the bank. The crew included Tommy, an expert safecracker, Greg, the getaway driver, and David, tasked with disabling the security systems. McGuire, the mastermind, oversaw every detail. At 9:30 p.m., dressed in dark clothing and equipped with their tools, they moved toward the bank, navigating Toronto's quiet streets to avoid attention. The bank was calm, with only a few employees inside and security guards on duty. McGuire had timed their approach to exploit a brief window when the guards were out of sight. Using a forged keycard, the crew entered through a side entrance leading to a service hallway. David immediately jammed the security cameras with a specialized device, rendering them useless. The team moved silently through the main lobby, avoiding the remaining employees, and descended to the vault level. Tommy began working on the vault's combination lock, using tools to bypass its intricate mechanism, while the others kept watch. McGuire monitored the stairwell, ensuring no interruptions. Greg waited in a nearby alley with a getaway car, a backup vehicle ready if needed. After tense minutes, Tommy signaled success. The vault was open. Inside, stacks of cash and valuable documents awaited. McGuire's heart raced as they filled bags with as much as they could carry, working efficiently from years of experience. Just as they prepared to leave, a bank employee emerged from the back office and spotted them. Gasping, the employee ran toward the emergency alarm. McGuire acted swiftly, ordering the crew to retreat. Tommy grabbed the final bag, and they rushed back to the stairwell, ascending to the rear entrance. Greg's car was waiting, engine running. The crew piled in and sped off as police sirens wailed in the distance. Greg, an experienced driver, navigated back alleys and side roads to evade pursuit, reaching the safe house where they could lay low and count their haul. Exhausted but relieved, the crew believed they had pulled it off. However, McGuire knew the real challenge was staying free. The police were already investigating, and the robbery made headlines. The bank's security had been expertly disabled, and the vault's locks bypassed with precision, pointing to a professional job. McGuire began laundering the money through underworld contacts, moving it out of Canada and into untraceable assets. But the pressure took its toll. David, the technician, grew paranoid and on May 15, 1973, turned himself in, confessing and naming McGuire and the others. His betrayal sparked a domino effect. Greg was arrested in a sting operation and revealed the crew's identities. On June 10, 1973, police raided McGuire's downtown Toronto apartment, where he lived under a false identity. They found stolen cash and incriminating documents. McGuire was arrested without resistance and charged with armed robbery, conspiracy, and possession of stolen property. The trial was swift, with overwhelming evidence. McGuire was convicted and sentenced to 35 years in prison. Most of the stolen money was recovered, though some remained missing. The heist, though meticulously planned, ultimately failed due to David's betrayal and the crew's inability to fully cover their tracks. McGuire's story became a cautionary tale in the criminal underworld, a reminder that even the most skilled thieves couldn't outrun the law forever. Released on parole in 1988 after serving 15 years, McGuire lived quietly, his name forever tied to one of Canada's most infamous heists. His legacy as a notorious criminal endures in the annals of Canadian history. The October Crisis of 1970 stands as one of the most intense and pivotal episodes in Canada's modern history, a series of events driven by the radical actions of the Front de Libération du Québec (FLQ), a separatist militant group advocating for Quebec's independence through violence. Active in the 1960s and early 1970s, the FLQ carried out bombings, robberies, and kidnappings to advance their cause, fueled by frustration with Quebec's political establishment and a vision for an independent French-speaking nation. Influenced by global revolutionary movements, the group's factions sought not only political sovereignty, but also sweeping societal change through aggressive means, believing peaceful negotiations were futile. Among the FLQ's key figures were Paul Rose, Jacques Rose, Francis Samar, and Pierre Vallières, a prominent advocate for the group's militant ideology. Paul Rose, born in 1943 in Montreal, emerged as a central figure in the crisis. A passionate and fiery member, Rose joined the FLQ in his youth, driven by a sense of duty to Quebec and a desire for radical transformation. Alongside his brother Jacques, he became a leading force in the group's militant wing, which had already gained notoriety for bombing public buildings. The FLQ's actions were calculated to provoke the Canadian government, forcing change through pressure and violence. In 1970, the FLQ escalated their campaign with the kidnapping of two prominent figures, igniting the October Crisis. On October 5th, a cell led by Paul Rose abducted James Cross, a British diplomat serving as the trade commissioner in Montreal, from his home. The kidnapping was a deliberate message to the Canadian government, with the FLQ demanding the release of 23 imprisoned comrades and the broadcast of a manifesto outlining their revolutionary ideology. Rose and his group communicated their demands through the media, threatening Cross's life if their terms were unmet. The abduction sent shockwaves through Canada's political landscape. Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau faced mounting pressure to address the growing threat of political violence while ensuring citizen safety. The Quebec provincial government, led by Premier Robert Bourassa, initially sought to negotiate with the FLQ, but the situation darkened on October 10th when the group kidnapped Pierre Laporte, Quebec's Minister of Labor. This second abduction intensified the crisis, thrusting the nation into a state of unease and forcing the government to confront a direct challenge to its authority. The media provided relentless coverage, keeping the country on edge as uncertainty loomed over the FLQ's next move. For many, the crisis marked a turning point in Canadian politics, raising questions about how far the government should go to maintain order against domestic terrorism. Public sentiment was divided. Some sympathized with the FLQ's cause, but most were appalled by their violent tactics. As tensions escalated, Trudeau and Bourassa grappled with a delicate balance, protecting national security without further inflaming the situation. The FLQ, under Rose's leadership, had proven their willingness to kill, and Trudeau recognized that yielding to their demands could embolden future terrorism. On October 16, 1970, he invoked the War Measures Act, an unprecedented peacetime decision granting the government sweeping powers to arrest suspects, impose curfews, and conduct searches without warrants. The move sparked controversy, with critics decrying it as an overreach that infringed on civil liberties. The act led to the arrest of hundreds, many detained without charge based on suspected FLQ ties or separatist leanings. Civil liberties groups condemned the government's heavy-handed approach, but the crisis took a tragic turn the next day, October 17th, when Pierre Laporte was found dead in the trunk of a car, strangled by his captors. His murder shocked the nation, pushing the crisis into its darkest phase and intensifying pressure on the government to act decisively. With Laporte's death, the urgency to secure James Cross's release grew. Authorities worked tirelessly behind the scenes, negotiating with the FLQ while pursuing leads to locate Cross. After weeks of tense discussions, on December 3, 1970, Cross was freed in exchange for partial concessions. Several FLQ members, including Paul Rosasel, were granted safe passage to Cuba, where they live in exile. Though the immediate threat subsided, the crisis left a lasting scar on Canada's psyche, prompting debates over government power and the handling of domestic terrorism. The FLQ's support waned in the aftermath, as many Quebecers distanced themselves from the group's extremism. The Quebec sovereignty movement persisted but shifted toward peaceful, democratic efforts. The crisis exposed deep cultural and political divides, shaping Canada's political landscape for decades. In the years following, Paul Rose and his associates were arrested and convicted of kidnapping, murder, and other crimes, receiving lengthy prison sentences. The government's response, particularly the War Measures Act, remained contentious, with many in Quebec viewing it as an attack on their political aspirations. The October crisis became a moment of reckoning, highlighting the lengths to which individuals would go for their ideals and the challenges of balancing security with civil rights. The legacy of the crisis endures, a somber reminder of Canada's complex history and the ongoing dialogue between Quebec and the rest of the nation. It remains one of the most significant events in Canadian history, a testament to the resilience of a country navigating its internal divisions. In 1973, Canada was gripped by a brazen criminal act that captured national attention, the Great Canadian Bank Robbery. Orchestrated by a highly organized syndicate with a history of heists across Ontario, the robbers employed meticulous planning, insider knowledge of banking operations, and cutting-edge technology to execute their audacious crime. At the heart of the operation was George Haskell, a notorious figure in Ontario's criminal underworld. Haskell, in his early 40s, was a former small-time thief who had risen to orchestrate complex crimes. Intelligent and ruthless, he was known for his charisma, strategic mind, and ability to evade capture. His criminal career was marked by careful planning and a knack for staying under the radar. Haskell assembled a tight-knit crew of skilled criminals, each bringing unique expertise to the table. James "Jimmy" Ferris, an explosives expert, Daniel Hughes, a tech-savvy specialist in bypassing security systems, and Tommy Barnes, a disgraced former police officer with intimate knowledge of law enforcement tactics. Together, they formed a formidable and dangerous team, determined to pull off one of the largest bank robberies in Canadian history. Their target was the Bank of Montreal branch on Yonge Street in Toronto, chosen for its prime location and substantial reserves of cash and valuables. For weeks, the crew cased the bank, studying its security protocols, guard schedules, and employee routines. Hughes even posed as a repairman to infiltrate the IT department, gathering critical intelligence on the alarm system and security measures. The group left nothing to chance, planning every detail from the timing of the heist to the escape routes. They knew the risks were high, but their confidence in their preparation was unshakable. The robbery was scheduled for the early hours of March 24, 1973, when the bank would be quiet, with minimal staff and a reduced security presence. The crew believed the early morning timing would delay police response, giving them a crucial edge. On the night of the heist, they gathered at a safe house on Toronto's outskirts. The atmosphere was tense but focused, with Haskell delivering a final briefing to ensure everyone knew their role. His calm demeanor steadied the team as they loaded into their vehicles, ready to execute their plan. The strategy was clear. Hughes would disable the alarm system and security cameras, Ferris would breach the vault's physical barriers, Barnes would manage the getaway, and Haskell would oversee the operation. The crew aimed to control the scene, intimidate any staff, and escape without a trace. By 4:30 a.m., they were in position. Having unlocked the rear entrance earlier, they entered the bank silently, communicating via earpieces to stay coordinated. Inside, Hughes swiftly accessed the security room and disabled the alarm system using a specialized device, ensuring no electronic alerts would be triggered. Ferris, meanwhile, used the explosives expertise to tackle the vault's reinforced steel door. With a controlled blast, he opened it without damaging the surrounding structure, though the noise echoed faintly in the quiet bank. Barnes kept watch in the main lobby, leveraging his law enforcement experience to anticipate potential threats and maintain control. As the vault door creaked open, the crew's excitement surged. Stacks of cash, gold bars, and other valuables lay within reach. They worked quickly, filling duffel bags with as much as they could carry, careful to minimize noise and delay. Haskell remained composed, ensuring the operation stayed on track. The team knew time was critical. Police could arrive at any moment. Just as they prepared to leave, an unexpected complication arose. A bank employee arrived early for a shift and entered through the front door, freezing at the sight of the robbers. Barnes acted swiftly, subduing the employee and instructing him to stay calm, assuring him no harm would come if he cooperated. The employee, disoriented but compliant, was told to remain in the bank and not contact police until the crew was gone. Though this encounter risked derailing the plan, Barnes handled it with authority, allowing the team to proceed. The crew moved to the rear exit, where their getaway vehicles waited. They had amassed a fortune in cash and valuables, and their escape cars, unassuming but fast, were ready. Splitting into two vehicles to evade capture, they sped off into Toronto's streets, believing they had pulled it off. But their plan began to unravel. Unbeknownst to them, the employee had slipped away after their departure and alerted police from a nearby payphone. Authorities mobilized quickly, dispatching cruisers to the scene. As the crew fled, a neighbor's earlier report of suspicious activity near the bank had already prompted police attention. By the time the robbers reached the streets, police cars were closing in, their lights flashing through the early morning fog. A high-speed chase erupted, with the crew weaving through traffic to outmaneuver their pursuers. Barnes, responsible for the getaway, had miscalculated a route, allowing police to gain ground. The chase ended in a suburban neighborhood, where police cut off their escape. Forced to abandon their vehicles, the robbers scattered on foot. Haskell took refuge in an abandoned house, but the others weren't as fortunate. Ferris was apprehended in a nearby park after a brief struggle. Hughes was caught hiding in an alley with some of the stolen cash, and Barnes was found concealed under leaves in a backyard. After hours of searching, police located Haskell in the house. His criminal history and role in the heist made him a prime target, and he was arrested without resistance. In the aftermath, most of the stolen money and valuables were recovered, though some cash was unaccounted for. The crew faced charges of robbery, assault, and possession of stolen goods. Haskell, the mastermind, received a 35-year prison sentence, while the others faced lengthy terms. Despite its meticulous planning, the heist failed due to swift police response and critical errors during the escape. The Great Canadian Bank Robbery became a symbol of the rising tide of organized crime in 1970s Canada, widely covered in the media for its boldness and the cunning of its leader. For Haskell, it marked the end of his criminal career, a cautionary tale of ambition undone by the law. The crew, once celebrated for their expertise, faded into obscurity, their audacious attempt etched into Canadian criminal history. In 1975, a shocking crime rattled the tranquil city of Calgary, Alberta, a brutal and carefully planned kidnapping that dominated headlines and left a lasting impact on the community. At the center of this heinous act were William Patrick Miller and Joseph Caron, two men previously unknown to police for major crimes. Their motives were a tangled mix of desperation, greed, and a warped sense of entitlement. William Miller, in his mid-30s, had recently moved to Calgary after drifting across Canada. With a history of minor offenses like petty theft and small-scale fraud, he showed no signs of the violence he would soon unleash. Struggling financially and emotionally, Miller was consumed by desperation. Known for his charm and manipulative nature, he concealed a deep bitterness toward his circumstances, exacerbated by a failed relationship and chronic unemployment. He felt the world had cheated him, pushing him toward drastic measures. Joseph Karen, Miller's accomplice, was a volatile figure Miller met just months earlier. Karen, with a more extensive criminal record, had a reputation for violence, having served time for assault and robbery. A hot-headed man who ran with Calgary's rough crowd, Karen harbored a sense of entitlement and a desire for revenge against the society he believed had wronged him. His alliance with Miller was a dangerous match, their shared resentment fueling a plan that would devastate lives. Their target was Sharon Woods, a warm and trusting woman in her late 20s who worked as a receptionist at a local law firm. Sharon's kindness made her a beloved figure, but also made her vulnerable. Miller had noticed her during errands downtown, perceiving her as an easy mark due to her predictable routine. Her regular 9-to-5 job gave the pair insight into her schedule, and Miller, driven by delusion, believed kidnapping an innocent person like Sharon would yield a hefty ransom to escape their miserable lives. Karen, eager for the thrill and potential payoff, saw the crime as a chance to assert control and prove himself. The duo spent days observing Sharon, noting her habits and pinpointing the best time to strike. Wednesday, June 4, 1975, when she left work in the evening. They planned to act swiftly, avoid witnesses, and hold her in a secluded location until their demands were met. On the night of the kidnapping, Sharon exited her office as usual, walking along a quiet, dimly lit street. Miller and Karen waited nearby in a stolen car parked down the road. As Sharon neared a street corner, Karen ambushed her from behind, grabbing her arms and dragging her toward the vehicle. She fought back, screaming for help, but Miller joined in, forcing her into the back seat. Disoriented and terrified, Sharon was driven away from downtown Calgary. In the car, Miller tried to calm her, claiming no harm would come if she cooperated, but Sharon's panic only grew. She screamed, cried, and begged for release, her pleas ignored by the men who had no intention of letting her go. They drove to a remote, abandoned house on the outskirts of Calgary, pulling Sharon inside and locking her in a room that became her prison. As they finalized plans to contact her family, Sharon was left bound and terrified, with little hope of rescue. The kidnappers settled on a $100,000 ransom, believing it would clear their debts and fund a fresh start. On June 5th, Miller called Sharon's mother, Helen Woods, delivering a calm but firm demand for the money. He warned that any police involvement would have consequences and provided precise instructions for the ransom drop, emphasizing secrecy and speed. Devastated, Helen consulted Sharon's father and family, determined to prioritize Sharon's safety. Though they planned to meet the demands, they knew police involvement was inevitable. Detective John McCulloch took charge of the investigation as soon as the Woods family reported the kidnapping. Tasked with identifying the culprits and resolving the crisis, McCulloch worked closely with the family to devise a plan for Sharon's safe return. Police gathered details on Miller and Karen, noting Miller's financial struggles and Karen's violent past. Though their criminal records were limited, their partnership posed a clear threat, and time was of the essence. As the 48-hour ransom deadline loomed, Sharon's family scrambled to gather the money, borrowing from friends and relatives. The pressure was immense, with the kidnappers threatening drastic action if the deadline passed. On June 7th, Helen drove to the designated drop-off, a secluded spot outside Calgary, with a portion of the ransom. Terrified but resolute, she followed instructions and met Miller, who took the money without offering immediate details about Sharon's release. Helen returned home, torn between relief and anxiety, unsure of the kidnappers' next move. McCulloch, alerted to the exchange, knew it was time to act. Police had been monitoring the situation and intensified efforts to locate Sharon's hideout. Through surveillance and intelligence, they identified the abandoned house where she was held. On the evening of June 8th, a tactical team surrounded the property in a coordinated rescue operation. Moving silently, they caught Miller and Karen off guard. Miller attempted to flee through a back exit but was quickly apprehended, while Karen's attempt to hide failed. Both were arrested without a struggle. Police reached Sharon's room, finding her exhausted but unharmed. She was comforted and given medical attention, her ordeal finally over. During interrogation, Miller and Karen confessed, citing financial strain and personal frustrations as their motives. Their lack of foresight was evident. They hadn't anticipated the consequences of their actions. Sharon's survival captivated the media, which praised her resilience. Her family, overwhelmed with relief, thanked the police for their swift response. The case, dubbed Sharon's Law, sparked discussions about law enforcement's handling of kidnappings and the need for rapid action. Sharon struggled with the emotional toll but leaned on family and community support to heal, determined to move forward. Miller was sentenced to 25 years in prison, Karen to 15, their lives forever marked by their crime. The case prompted new law enforcement guidelines for high-risk kidnappings, emphasizing quick response and collaboration. Sharon became an advocate for crime victims, sharing her story to highlight the importance of support for survivors. Her courage and resilience transformed a traumatic experience into a beacon of hope, demonstrating the strength of the human spirit in the face of adversity.